You and I have an athletic past in common. You also have a significant legacy of athletes in your family. Can you talk about how athletics has carried forward for you as an artist? Mm, Sometimes I don't think it has. But then maybe uh, I think a lot of times being an artist, there's a lot of like failure involved, and sometimes things not working out. And maybe being an athlete has taught me that, as corny as it sounds, things get hard, but you can't give up. Also, having a routine is really important to keep the brain like active, and keeping the body active is a way to keep the mind active. So I think like that both of them have like meditative. Uh, I think the meditation for me. Okay. Can you read my cursive?
I can.
Okay.
What has significantly changed about your practice from when you first became an artist,
See.
other than, no, whether that's
I wrote in
whether
cursive.
that's mental, physical, or emotional. Okay, I'm gonna read it again.
Okay.
What has significantly changed about your practice from when you first became an artist, whether that's mental, physical, or emotional? Um, I mean, one thing that has definitely changed is I'm better at doing certain things, and so like technical things, and I think some of the things, like when I look at the work that I did when I was younger, there's a kind of I see a kind of ambition to do something, and I wasn't really fully capable of doing the thing that I wanted to do. And so I think now it feels sometimes that kind of technical thing is helpful, and then sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's about kind of trying to either unlearn something or to shift, consciously shift away from what I'm trying to do into some territory where I don't know what I'm doing. So that, I guess that's a kind of a self-consciousness to make a decision like that. And I don't think I was that way when I was younger. I think I was just like trying to do this thing and not really knowing how to do it, and doing the best that I could do. And then over time learning how to do it. I mean, that's what comes to mind, is the thing about experience. It feels very different now. Is this on? Yeah.
All right. You and I met through a number of converging relationships. You were mounting your last show at Green Neftali, and I had finished my last film. We have friends in common, including some of the people who had worked on African Desperate. That's the movie I was in. So I had heard a lot about that project as it was being made. I had seen your passageway pieces, and it was compelling to learn that the same person who made those works were acting in a narrative film. I'm curious about your relationship to acting and to performance in general. Where do you place it in the range of work that you make? I don't have an agent, so if I get asked to do something and I think it's cool, I'll say yes to it if I have the time. I think mainly it's about time management when it comes to acting. it's a part of the practice, but I think a lot of the things that I do, I actually don't think about them separate too often, and I'm just into doing. That sounds so corny to say out loud, but it's true. If someone asks me to do something I think it's good, I'll do it, and I think it's I'm just open, and I like acting. I really like performing. It's fun for me. Even if it's challenging, because we talked about that before, where everyone's idea of fun can look so different, and something challenging for me can be really fun. And I think acting is challenging, and I enjoy it. Okay.
Women get asked questions.
I could read it, Matthew.
Women get asked this question a lot after they become mothers. But has fatherhood changed your practice at all? And now that she is an adult, have you thought of collaborating with her? Yeah, so the thing that changed a lot for me after my daughter was born was the way that I had to partition my schedule. The time thing shifted a lot, and so I started. I mean, I was already working on projects, specific pieces. And so it already had a kind of time organization to it.
But I think I'm more so like asking, like, you know how like when a female artist gets pregnant and then they have the baby, and then automatically the work is now about motherhood, even if it's not. Mm-hmm. Do you think that has happened to you in your practice sometimes, or have you explored fatherhood in your work?
Mm-hmm. I did make. Well, the second part of your question, I did make a piece with my daughter, and it was during pandemic. It was a kind of duet that we performed, and it was both a kind of opportunity for us both to simultaneously be making something. We were both drawing, but there was a kind of way that we talked about the piece as trying to capture the feeling of when she was leaving the house to go off to college at the time, and so yeah, it was a really beautiful and also I think useful for both of us way to talk about that and think about it and share it, and to kind of perform a work that way. And it was improvised. It wasn't really scripted or anything. So it was she was doing her thing and I was doing my thing. And yeah. I don't know if that really answers the question you asked exactly, but I mean, it's something that I think I really wanted to do, and I think that's something she really enjoyed doing also. So whether or not anybody asked me about that, I think it was clearly on my mind, you know. Mm-hmm.
Matthew, it's cool, but your questions are really long.
I didn't know we were going to do
yeah. I'm really interested in the duality of your passageway pieces. When I first encountered them, they felt quite frontal and confrontational, like standing face to face with a person who is armed, or maybe more than a effigy of an armed person. But the more time I spent with them, the more they became interior facing, more about self-protection and interiority. I love that they can function on both registers, and that makes the specific quality of each door and each bat very compelling. Can you talk about how you chose the bat for the specific doors? Are they as found, or do you manipulate them? They're as found. And I'm very selective of the bats that I choose because I don't want them to look new. But yeah, they're found. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Do you, I mean, how do you decide which bat goes with which door, for example?
It's not really a conscious thing. Sometimes it's like, oh, that looks good with that door. Mm-hmm. For, this is a lot of stuff that I think as artists is very unexplainable, and sometimes things are like wielding you to do something, and you don't even know why you're doing it at that moment. I think a lot of my art, for me, more and more explanations and possibilities come up the longer it's out there in the world, and then I can. It's many reasons why something is happening in a piece, and sometimes I don't know until, maybe I'll know eventually, but right now I don't know why I choose the bats with which door. I feel like they match each other.
Yeah, I think I also asked you last time we were together if the pipe length is site-specific. And I believe what you said was that that there are certain places where it just has to be closer to the wall, but there isn't necessarily a length designated for each piece.
Not necessarily, because it depends on the space, but I usually base things off of my height. Mm-hmm. So if it can be over 6 foot, I prefer it to be over 6 foot.
The door itself.
The pole that pinches the door, mm-hmm. or holds the door up, but I think of it more as it pinching the door to help stand it upright. So I always say if a door piece can be over 6 foot, let's make it that, because I still want to be present in the work somehow.
Yeah. Is it true that the side facing the viewer is always the interior side?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the bat lets you know it's inside.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Whose turn is it?
I don't. I really don't know. I think it's your turn.
My turn to read, right? Okay. This is good. If you weren't an artist, who do you think you would be right now? I mean, my backup plan was always to cut hair when I was younger. So it could have gone that way.
We might have worked at the same salon.
Yeah. I learned how to cut hair when I was in high school. And then I cut friends' hair in college. I even cut Barbara's hair a couple times. Oh. Yeah, that was kind of my side gig.
Wait, you can't. What? How did you cut her hair?
Barbara's hair?
Was it a bob?
More or less, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Long bob, just a trim.
That's such a fun fact to know about you. I didn't know. Okay. I read about the way you find connection between your visual artwork with your writing in terms of narrative or autobiography. But I haven't heard you talk about how or if you feel that your sculpture relates to language on a structural level. Can you talk about that? Are you into Saul LeWitt or any of that kind of structural work from that era? I am. I actually got into Saul LeWitt because his daughter, Eva LeWitt, runs a residency in Spoleto, Italy, called. Now there's an audience, and I guess I don't know the name anymore. Mahler and LeWitt, and Saul lived in Spoleto, Italy, and I got to be really confronted with his work, with his pieces. Before that, I wasn't that familiar with his work. So I am into it. How do I feel? Well, I don't know how much this is true because I've been saying this for a while now, and sometimes it isn't true. But a lot of my sculpture work is based off of poetry or literature. So I think when it relates to language on a structural level, it's more like I see my sculptures in sonnets, but maybe not everybody sees it that way, which is totally fine. And yeah, that's sometimes how I see that all my work like holds hands and they're related to each other, and then other times I'm like, this isn't the same. They're very separate from each other. But yeah, I see my sculpture work as like visual poetry.
Yeah, it feels that way, and it's interesting the way that they're often the iterations are shown together in that way. Do you prefer it that way, to show like more than one closet, for example, or more than one passageway?
It just all depends.
Mm-hmm.
I think it just depends on the space. I prefer. I mean, I prefer for all my work to be shown like at once. But if that's not I'm adaptable. I don't. Yeah, I'm adaptable. It doesn't need to be a bunch of doors or closet pieces if the space doesn't call for that.
Mm-hmm.
Or sometimes, you're in a group show and you got to see how your work relates to the other pieces in the show. But yeah, I'm 80% adaptable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you consider them sequences or like autonomous pieces?
I think that depends on the day, to be real. Right now, it's the long narrative. It's different chapters of the same piece.
Me?
Yeah. I wish we had like spa music playing or something in the back.
How would you describe yourself to someone who was unaware of your practice at a dinner party? That happens a lot. I mean, right? So if somebody says, "What do you do?" I usually say, I'm a sculptor and I make films.
Not the humble version. Like if you're gonna be at the table with this person for a while, you can't just be like, I make films and I'm a sculptor. Like we're at this dinner for a minute. Like yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. So I don't know the person?
No, you really don't. And they're not even pretending like they don't know you. Like they genuinely don't know who you are.
Yeah. I mean, it takes me a while, to want to tell somebody about myself. So, I mean, I would take that route first. I would tell them how I work generally before I would get into anything else, for sure. And I don't mind talking about that. Like, I don't mind. Talking about, I think the thing that's sort of easy to talk about is the way narrative works in my work and how it relates to the objects that I make. And that seems to resonate for somebody, even if they're not involved with art, you know what I mean? To say, okay, there's a story, and then from that story I make objects that relate to that story. So there is a quite basic way to talk about it, which I don't mind doing. That's usually the path I take.
I'm curious about how you start. What's your relationship to drawing? That's not how Matthew talks. I was just reading it that way. I doodle or I make sketches, but I don't draw. I usually make a sketch and then I'll actually write next to it what I want to do in the sketchbook. I throw a lot of my sketches away, actually, which is probably not the smartest thing to do. But if I sketch it out, there's the idea, I want to execute it. And I write in bulletins. Like, because I can't draw that well, sometimes I'll just bullet point it. That's actually how the door piece started. It was me writing about my grandmother's house, but then the sketch of the door, and underneath the door piece, me talking about how it was what I wanted it to look like in reality. So that's how a lot of things start off. It starts off not with a drawing, but it usually starts off with a paragraph. Mm-hmm. That's easier for me. I've always been like that, though, because I've been journaling since I was 8 years old. And sometimes it's better for me to articulate myself through a letter or even like a postcard or, to write it down. I feel more bold on paper. So that's how it starts. It starts off with like a sketch of writing.
Right. That's cool. I think it's I can relate to that. And I've often wondered if I would ever be able to stop with the writing and jump straight to the object, and haven't ever really been able to do that. But it's something that I've aspired to. I think, because I think what happens to me is there are all these other steps of like making the film or the performance, and then getting to the object. And but I remember somebody asking me that, like, right after I made my first show, like, what if it was just a script, and just objects.
This is off top, but how do you feel about that though when people make suggestions to you? Like, oh, this will look cool as this. How do you feel about that?
Of course it depends on who it is, but I work with a group of people and always have, and it was smaller at one point, and now it's maybe a little bit larger, but it was always a kind of collective, and in a sense, and I think, back to the sports question, I think it's one of the things that I carried over from sports is that I was involved in team sports, so I think it felt actually odd for me to be in the studio alone, and still does. So I really like the input of the people that I work with and trust, and so I don't mind suggestions from other people. I'm used to it, I guess. Mm-hmm.
Me and you both played group sports, but I think we're the opposite in that, actually.
Yeah.
I do like being a part of a collective and having suggestions, but I played volleyball really competitively for a very long time, from 5th grade to senior year of high school. But I feel like as an athlete, it's like, I'm a part of a team, but I have to do my part. Like, I'm still my own machine. Like, I have to do my part to be a part of the team. So I see myself still very much as like, yes, I belong to like a collective or a community, but I don't know. It's always one teammate that's off doing their little in La La Land a little bit. Yeah. Is it you?
Might be you.
Y'all supposed to be paying attention too. Whose turn is it? Okay. Thank you. You told me you were in a hardcore band. I'm curious if you feel that if you feel that ethos of hardcore has influenced your work as a visual artist or as a writer. I was in a kind of like a noise band. I wasn't in a hardcore band, but I like that you think that.
Okay, so
They're kind of the same thing. Like electronica and hardcore do have a lot in common. And I do listen to hardcore music, or did listen to hardcore music. I'm not as angsty as I once was. I said this in Chicago. I did a talk in Chicago, and I think that musicians or artists who see themselves as musicians are actually very good at, they're very open to feedback and collaborating, because when you make music, you have to be. Maybe that's what has carried into it. And also, too, I think sometimes being a part of bands, you see the potential sometimes before the audience does, and you stick to it. And I also think being a part of making music and being a part of the music scene has helped me. I really think it's really taught me that, yeah, you got to do your own thing. Like, some people are going to think what you're doing is like so lame, and other people are really going to encourage you and tell you to keep going. And I think that's what helped me with sports and in music. It's like, you have to be passionate about it, and you have to push yourself to get better at what you do. No one's really gonna force you to do it. And I think athletes hear that a lot. Like, you go to practice. Like, I can't force you to go to practice. And musicians, I think for musicians, it's like, if you want to be good, you have to practice on your own and get better. And yeah, I think it's helped me a lot, actually. I don't think about that part of myself too often, because at this point it feels so long ago, but I've lived many lives before I got to this one, and each one has like helped me be who I am now.
Mm-hmm. Do you relate to the kind of reductive thing about hardcore, the kind of I guess it's sort of an ideological reductiveness, right?
Yeah, but I also think in certain music scenes, I like the music, but I also felt very isolated in those scenes too. So I think I picked and chose what I wanted from each scene I was a part of that was positive, and I kept it moving. Yeah.
My turn, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What is an important boundary you set for yourself as an artist? When I was in college, I worked as a fashion model, and I did that for 5 years. And so, as a model, you're kind of in and out of these situations every day where you're in somebody else's narrative, and you're making an image out of that, and so, I mean, that eventually became really uncomfortable for me. Like it became harder to kind of play along. And I think particularly when I was developing my own language as an artist, and so I stopped doing that. I was really happy to do it. And then when I started exhibiting as an artist and the kind of press thing started to happen, I put up a really strong boundary. I think because of my experience in the fashion business, like I really didn't want what I was making to be reduced to an image. And yeah, I think that was probably the moment where I felt most sort of strict about that. And I think over time, I felt like I could participate in that in different ways, and it didn't feel necessarily threatening. But I think in those first couple of years, I really felt like I cannot do this, and I can't let that happen, and I have to draw this line in the sand. So I think that's my answer. Yep.
For me, your closet and door sculptures have something to do with concrete poetry, and I wonder if you relate to that reading at all. What is concrete poetry? What is concrete poetry? Is that a genre or no?
Yeah.
Yes?
It's a genre, yeah.
Oh, please explain.
I mean, concrete poetry is...
Is it like slam poetry?
No. I mean, I think this question is kind of redundant to one you already answered, really.
Okay, let's skip it.
Yeah, let's skip it. Okay. How many do you have left?
This is my last one. How many you got?
There's more.
Really? Let me choose then. Give me my makeup. Thank you. Okay, I'll choose the rest then. After I saw your show at 52 Walker, I sent you a photo of one of my mom's closets because she really creates her closets in all the extra spaces in her life. Do you arrange the domestic spaces where you live with art, or do you keep your living space free from art or art making? My living room is my studio at the moment. I go in and out of having a studio separate from my house. During the pandemic, I got rid of my studio that was in Greenpoint. I shared it with my friend, Bunny. Honestly, arranging the house. I grew up in a house where we didn't really hang things up on the walls and things like that, and I think I'm still very much like that. Also, my apartment right now, to me, is very temporary, so I don't want to... Everyone's so different. Some people are like, who cares that you're renting? Make your house a home. And I get that. But this is an apartment that I'm kind of like, nah, I got a bed, kitchen, living room. I have a few pieces of art on my walls, but not that much.
Mm-hmm. So how did you do the closets then?
That was when I had a studio.
Okay.
And also, too, I do things on site a lot.
Okay.
Because I got to check out the space first anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do a lot of things on site.
Mm. In the studio, how far did you take it? Or did you...
What you mean?
Well, like each of the different closet compositions. Like how did you work that out in your studio before?
No. I have a lot of trust in myself. So when I want to execute something, I don't really even think like, oh, this can't fit, or like, this needs to be this way. And I'm still like adaptable. So if someone tells me like, it can't work like this, we got to do it like this. Mm-hmm. If it makes sense to me, I'm more than likely to be like, okay, mm-hmm. Yeah. But I like doing things on site. I don't really have a studio practice where I wake up every day and I'm making something. Because for my own language, I'm really trying to change the idea of work and making art. And I don't want to make work. I want to make art, so I'm trying not to be like, you got to be doing something every day, because no, I don't. Y'all caught me in a moment of thinking. Yeah, I wrote a lot for you. Okay. I got to be random. Hold on. I was about to choose something. Have you ever thought about making a feature-length film with A-list actors or indie darlings with full dialogue and going to film festivals?
Sure. I've definitely thought about it, and I haven't thought about it in quite a while. I think, like, after the Cremaster cycle, I was probably thinking about it a little bit more. Like, would it be interesting to do that? And I think, especially at that moment, I really didn't feel confident about directing dialogue. And I, since then, have made some work with some dialogue, but I'm not very good at that. So I don't think it would make sense to try making a feature film that was really dependent on that. Because I've made plenty of feature films that are not dependent on that.
Or what if someone came to you with a script and was like, I want you to direct it? Would you be open to it?
Probably not. I think I'm, at this point, I think I've just been doing things in the way that I want to do them, and the way that I think I'm, best able to do them for long enough that I think it would be hard to start working in a committee-based situation and working with somebody else's material like that. I don't think it would work. I think that ship has sailed.
What are your ideas on mentorship? Have you been mentored? Have you ever mentored a younger artist?
So I think I think that my studio has been that. A lot of people have passed through the studio, and a lot of them have come right out of school, come into that environment, and learned a lot from the quite talented people who worked there, and then moved on to other positions, whether as artists or in other
But you wouldn't say
fabrication situations.
that mentorship is like a conscious, like you're not looking at an artist and like, oh, I want to take this person under my wing. It's more like a subconscious thing.
I think it's something that I realized after a number of years of working that way, it's one of the things that the studio is. And so I think when I'm around like a teaching situation, which I haven't really done, I've visited schools, but I've never really held a teaching position. And so when I'm around that, I always kind of wonder what that would be like for me. And I think eventually did realize that I think there's a form of mentorship in the way that the studio is run, and I think that's the contribution that I've been able to make, and I think that's enough. Wait, I should just come up with a question, maybe.
No, you don't have to. How do you deal with the pressure of gallery demand versus your own desires?
Whoa. My God, it keeps changing. Like the way that galleries work is so different now than it used to be, and you know, the way that, like, what is a demand? I guess, like, to have work available for an art fair or something. Is I think there's that, and that can be a demand. But I think the way that exhibitions work for me is really more to do with the calendar, the schedule that's set up by the project. And the project usually takes 5, 7, 10 years sometimes. So it's kind of like it sort of sorts out the exhibition part of it. But I've definitely been doing it long enough that I've seen what a gallery does change in a number of times. And I don't know, what am I saying? I guess, can you say the question again?
I don't know, because I threw it in the pile.
Or just like generally, it's sort of about how do you balance the
Oh yeah, here it
pressures?
goes. How do you deal with the pressure of gallery demand versus your own desires?
Right. Well, I mean, another way of saying is that what I do takes a lot of resource, like both sculpturally and cinematically. Like it costs a lot to do what I do, and I need help. I can't do it on my own, and I can't generate enough income to do it without support. So, like, I need to work with the galleries that I work with in order to do what I do. And so I think it means that there's a kind of a give and take that has to happen just to make the work. And so kind of used to that.
We got well, maybe one more, maybe two more. Let me read the question first. Okay. We got one more. I think a lot of artists don't talk about this, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to ask you this. How do you handle jealousy if it's coming towards you or out of you as an artist? Because I do think this is a very competitive world that we're in. So how do you, like, manage the negative feelings of being an artist?
Mm-hmm. I mean, one thing I know that I work toward with every project that I do is to try to get rid of myself in some way. And I think that that's one of my relationships to complexity, I think, is to try to, like, make something that's complicated enough that I can't figure it out myself, and it gets sort of swirled around within this kind of collective group and the group effort, and then it becomes its own thing, and it has its own demands, it has its own momentum, and that's when I get really comfortable. I think in the beginning, when, like, I'm holding it solely and I have to initially communicate that to others, is like a really uncomfortable place to be in. And I think it's not exactly what you're asking about, but that's the space that's sort of the hardest for me. And I kind of want the thing to be outside of me and beyond my capability, beyond my ability to kind of harness it. And so I think it's kind of an answer, which is that I kind of probably even pathologically complicate what I'm making so that I'm not in the center of it anymore. And I feel more comfortable then. Can do, yeah.
Do y'all have any questions, actually, since we're here?
I would like to know more about how you say the galleries have changed, like their function has changed, or what they do, how they work, how that's changed.
Her question was, yeah, there's another mic.
Well, you were mentioning earlier that you feel like galleries don't work the same as they used to, and I was just curious about like, what do you see that difference? Like, what is that difference now versus like, what did they do in the past? And is it better or worse, or what would you like them to do? I guess.
I mean, it's different for sure. I don't know if it's better or worse. I think it was a more kind of localized situation when I started, and there were just far fewer people, far fewer galleries, and far fewer resources probably. So I mean, it's become a little bit more industrial, right? I think there's just more cost, and there's more overhead, and there's more people, and it's just like a bigger enterprise. And maybe the good side of that is that if you do work at a larger scale and you're fortunate enough to be in a situation like that where you're supported, there's potentially more resource. So it's hard to say whether it's better or worse. It's just very different from the experience that I had when I was a young artist.
Thank you. Who else? Anybody else got a question? Going once, going twice. Oh, okay. Should we pass the mic? Okay. Well, yeah, let's teamwork. Pass it, y'all.
Good evening. I kind of wanted to touch back on that question when they asked, like, the boundaries of working with a gallery when they try to push you against your practice. And I wanted to know if both of you ever have that little voice in your head that's like, actually, no, I'm here because I've been doing what I wanted to do and what I was called to do. I don't actually need to be flexible with what you want because I'm the artist. Does that make sense?
I think so. I'm just thinking about how I'm going to answer you.
Okay, sweet.
You want to go first? Okay. I think for me, oddly enough, it always works out. But I do need to go through sometimes in my head, I'm going through it. I'm actually spiraling a little bit. And the next day it's like, oh, it's fine. Like, we figured it out. I have yet to have to compromise myself or, yeah, I know why I'm here. And for me, it just always has worked out. Right now, it's been working out. But of course, I think every artist has that moment where they're like, I don't want to do this no more, or they're really frustrated. But I think any career path that someone goes on, you're gonna go through that. Like, even if I was a doctor, I would have days where I would be like, I don't want to do this. I think every career has its pros and its cons. But yeah, I'm very aware as to why I do what I do. And yeah, it can be challenging, but for whatever reason, I always figure it out.
I'm just thinking about how, I mean, I'm assuming you're an artist, and it's so you know how relatively rare it is to have like a studio visit that's really that really connects. And I think the same can be said for art professionals coming into your studio, especially when something is just developing. Like I think I have found that it's hard to assume anymore that somebody can come in and see the kind of germ of what you're doing and really understand what it's going to be. So I think it often gets taken in some kind of literal direction if it's not literal. And it often is misunderstood at that point. So I guess I have either just come to terms with that or have lowered my expectation or something like that, in that moment when things are really vulnerable, I think it is hard to, or another way of saying it, I think that's the moment when you really have to kind of believe in what you're doing, because it's hard for anyone else to really understand it at that point. And
I notice that's why I don't do studio visits in the studio. Sometimes I just prefer to meet up and figure out what that person has in mind, or kind of give them a snippet of what I'm doing, because yeah, sometimes people don't know what's going on in the studio, and yeah. I think it's easier to just meet up, and then if the studio visit's awkward, y'all can just both go your separate ways.
Yeah. But I would also add that there are exceptions to what I said. Like, I think there are people who are incredible in their ability to come in and look at something in a fragmented state and understand what its potential is. It's just rare, that's all. And yeah, I always feel like I need to remind myself that that's true.
Oh, you have a question?
Hello. For Matthew, I was curious if you can talk a little bit about the agency that the materials have in your narrative making, and the kind of relationship between the materials and the narrative, and whether they are kind of more passive and the narrative goes through them or is performed through them, or do they also inform the narrative as well? Are they like a generative element in your practice or not?
I mean, I think they can be both. I mean, they're a little bit like a repertoire in a way, for me, in that materials kind of come and go and like make repeated appearances, and I think sometimes when they come back, they're being treated, maybe their history is being foregrounded rather than their material behavior. So, and I'm kind of interested in both ends of that, and but for sure, I think as soon as I get, for whatever reason, attracted to a story or a narrative, I'm desperately looking for a way of connecting it to a material, to work my way out of the kind of relentless narrative structure that it has. So, yeah, I'm quite, I need that, but I need it to be malleable also. Like, it kind of like a material can't just be one thing. It needs to be a number of different things.
Okay. Oh, okay. You're next, but I saw you first. Okay, we can pass the mic. How are we gonna do that though? You could use mine.
Hello, hi. So this is a question for both of you, and I'm curious, what has been your most favorite or enjoyable piece that you've created, whether it has ever made it into a full fruition out into the world or just only existed in your mind's eye as a process? Yeah.
My sister actually asked me this question in Chicago, and I told her, as of right now, My favorite, or the one that really sticks out to me right now, is my entryway pieces, because it's such a representation of, I think, who I am and where I came from, and I see a lot of people that I know within that piece. And yeah, I think that's the work I'm actually most proud of, because I see a legacy in that piece. Because, you know, I'm getting to an age where a lot of the elders in my family they're starting to die. So I think that's another reason too why that door piece is actually so important to me, because I'm losing a lot of people as I'm getting older.
I mean, I have to say that I feel I felt as engaged by the last work that I made secondary as anything that I've made, and I think maybe in part because of the way that the collaborative work that is inherent in making film became foregrounded in secondary. I think that I kind of went into it wanting to create a system where different artists could come together and create a kind of palimpsest of these artistic forms, and I don't even know if I knew that I had always wanted to do that, because it's certainly I mean, it's something that I know that I'd always taken away from the bigger film projects, was the way that the synergy of that situation is just so exciting, and the way that all of these very talented people come together and create this form. But, you know, a film sort of has it has a different structure than the thing that I just made. I think it was made as it was developed as if a live work, and workshopped that way. So it just had a very different structure than a film would have. And so I felt like I had found with that a kind of hybrid that I didn't know I was looking for.
Hi. This one is for Diamond. I'm trying to figure out how to word it, so I'm going to say as I'm speaking. But I feel like as artists, we're always being told to like market ourselves. And I guess as a Black woman showing up in spaces where you don't really see yourself, how do you show up in those spaces? How do you feel about showing up in those spaces? And what's that like dynamic like with you, if there is one?
I think everyone is so different. It depends, right? Sometimes I show up and I go home. I think it's a great question, but it's actually complex. And I think you're in those spaces for a reason, and you deserve to be in those spaces. I think it's showing up, and if you're uncomfortable, not being timid and not just being grateful to be in the room. Actually speaking up for yourself, and what we talked about earlier, having boundaries. And stating those boundaries, because believe it or not, people will respect it if you state it. And people aren't mind readers. So if you let people know how you feeling, that you can shift the energy in the room. But it's no but to it. Sometimes I'm not feeling it and I just go home. Like, it's not that simple, but I think to answer your question quickly, That's my answer. So thank you for coming, everybody.
Also, Precious, thank you for inviting us.
Thank you guys for coming. Thanks for doing it. Thank you everyone for being here.